A relentless virus swept across the nation, yet I, Ethan, made the unthinkable decision to resign from my post at the Vaccine Research Institute. In these critical times, you're choosing self-preservation? Dr. William, a recently arrived physician, accosted me, his voice laced with indignation, his face flushed crimson, and in a fit of rage, he even lashed out, his foot connecting sharply with my leg. Or are you just another one of those academic frauds, all talk and no substance, trying to bail out when the going gets tough? William's outburst stung, but it was more than just the physical pain. It was a chilling echo of the past. In my previous life, it was William who had leaped ahead of me, basking in the glory of releasing the flu vaccine first. I had desperately pleaded with my wife and sister to vouch for me, to attest to my relentless work and genuine research. Instead, they had turned on me, offering hollow apologies online, portraying me as someone temporarily blinded by greed, begging for public forgiveness. Their betrayal had solidified the accusations against me, a thief who stole his colleague's breakthrough. The institute had promptly dismissed me, casting me out like a pariah. Walking the streets became an ordeal, every glance a judgment, every whisper a condemnation. Months of tireless, round-the-clock research had already weakened my constitution, and fate dealt another cruel blow. I contracted the very flu I was trying to combat. My weakened body succumbed. I died a miserable, lonely death on the unforgiving streets. Then, darkness gave way to light. I gasped awake, disoriented, to find myself back in the institute, a week before the fateful press conference where our research findings were to be presented. Next week, we'll hold a press conference to showcase our research achievements to the public. The familiar voice of the institute. Director snapped me back to reality. I blinked, focusing on her face as she addressed us, her words cutting through the morning air. I understand you've all been working tirelessly, but please pay attention. She paused, her gaze lingering on me, a subtle pointedness in her tone. Ethan, wasn't it? I noticed you were dozing off earlier, and your focus seems elsewhere. Keeping someone like that around, someone distracted, isn't it just inviting them to freeload and steal the fruits of everyone else's labor? William, ever eager to seize an opportunity to attack, jumped in, his words sharp and barbed, aiming directly at me. Yet, to his evident dismay, no one echoed his accusations. A palpable silence filled the room. My reputation within the institute preceded me. My skills and dedication were well known. William, the newcomer, had initially seemed like a highly ambitious young doctor, eager to prove himself against me. Now, with the clarity of a second life, I recognized something more sinister in his animosity. The director smoothly diffused the tension with a few placating words, then dismissed us, reminding everyone to rest well. I lingered, slowly, gathering my belongings, my mind racing, piecing together the fragments of my shattered past. I was back, a week before everything fell apart. Ethan, you lucky dog. Your wife and sister are here to pick you up. A colleague's cheerful voice broke through my thoughts. Stepping out of the institute, I saw them. Two figures swathed in protective gear, completely covered from head to toe, waited near the entrance. Sophia, my wife, and Sarah, my sister. They explained that my current protective suit was outdated and, concerned about potential infection, they'd brought a new one. They meticulously helped me into it, their movements practiced and efficient. Honey, Sarah and I have cooked dinner already. It'll be ready as soon as we get home, Sophia said, her voice soft and solicitous, as she linked her arm through mine. Ethan, you have to finish your meals this time. Even when you're buried in research, you can't neglect your health, Sarah added. Sternly, her brow furrowed with concern. After Mom and Dad passed away so young, you're the most important person in my life. In my previous life, these words would have warmed my heart, assurances of their love and care. Now, knowing what awaited me, a bitter taste rose in my mouth. This carefully orchestrated display of affection felt hollow, a prelude to betrayal. In the previous timeline, William had preempted me, presenting my vaccine at the press conference. That day, Sarah and Sophia had driven me to the institute. Conveniently, the car had broken down on the way. By the time I arrived, it was my turn to present. My report mirrored William's almost verbatim. Chaos erupted. How could two researchers arrive at identical findings? The public outcry was immediate and fierce, demanding severe punishment for the plagiarist. For me, desperate, I'd begged Sarah and Sophia to testify on my behalf. They had witnessed my relentless research firsthand. They had agreed, only to turn on me in front of the world. In a tearful live stream, they confessed my momentary lapse of judgment, pleading for public leniency. Their testimony sealed my fate. Convicted by public opinion in my own family, I was fired from the institute. Sophia and Sarah, feigning disappointment and righteous anger, banished me from our home, claiming they needed to teach me a lesson. The city, gripped by fear of the rampant virus, was a ghost town. Businesses were shuttered. Survival became a daily struggle. My body, weakened by months of grueling research, succumbed to the virus. Abandoned and alone, I died in the cold, indifferent streets. But fate, in its mysterious wisdom, had granted me a second chance. Eat up, then back to your study, Ethan. I know Sarah and I are longing for some real time with you. But we understand you have something far more important to do, Sarah said, collecting my empty bowl, gently guiding me towards my study. Yes, yes, Sophia chimed in, her smile bright. It was seeing you so engrossed in your research that made me fall in love with you at first sight. Her words, once sweet, now felt like a chilling directive, pushing me back into the lab. Get back to research. Finish it quickly, so they can steal it and hand it to William. Only Sophia and Sarah had unrestricted access to my study, to my files. It was unfathomable that my research could simply materialize in William's hands without their intervention. Under their insistent, yet subtly coercive, urging, I reluctantly retreated to my study. The room was filled with research materials, meticulously organized. Any tampering would be immediately obvious. I meticulously scanned every corner, every potential hiding place, searching for hidden cameras, for any sign of surveillance. Nothing. Even a sweep with a phone's infrared scanner yielded no results. The memory of their earlier, seemingly genuine concern flickered in my mind. Perhaps I was misjudging them. Sarah, my own sister, who had been my rock since our parents' death, my companion for over 20 years. Sophia, my wife, our relationship a decade-long harmony, seemingly free of major discord. Could years of shared life, of love, be just a fabrication? It seemed impossible. Then where had things gone wrong? How had William so completely and accurately stolen my research? I knew my director at the institute valued my work. Even in the face of overwhelming public condemnation in my past life, she had stood by me, initially. She had even questioned William about the intricacies of his vaccine research, the theoretical underpinnings, the experimental processes. He had answered flawlessly, confidently, every detail perfectly aligned with the actual research. William had even shared some of his supposed preliminary findings with colleagues earlier. I, on the other hand, had always been a solitary figure, head down in my lab, rarely engaging in casual conversations. Aside from the director, no one at the institute could truly vouch for my independent work. The higher authorities, swayed by the tide of public opinion and William's seemingly impeccable knowledge, had swiftly concluded that I was the fraud. The director, powerless against the official ruling, had been forced to dismiss me. The chilling thought of my current research, my hard work, becoming William's triumph gnawed at me. Restlessness consumed me, making focused experimentation nearly impossible. I began frantically searching online, seeking similar, bizarre cases of research theft, of academic sabotage. Ethan, are you seriously on social media? How can you be so distracted from your research after Sarah and I have sacrificed so much for you? Sophia's sharp voice, laced with impatience, shattered the quiet. She pounded aggressively on the study door. I opened it to find Sophia's earlier, saccharine sweetness completely vanished. Her face was etched with irritation. Previously, she had never shown any interest in my work, even actively avoiding any attempts to discuss it, claiming it was too complex for her to understand. Sophia is just putting all her hope in you, wanting this pandemic to end quickly so we can all take off these suffocating suits, Sarah interjected quickly, smoothly pulling Sophia away from the doorway. Don't pressure Ethan. There's plenty of time. He works at his own pace. But time, I knew, was a luxury I didn't possess. If the timeline held true to my previous life, my death was less than a month away. My time was running out. I had to seize every second. Even without concrete proof of Sarah and Sophia's betrayal, their suspicious behavior couldn't be ignored. Trust no one but myself. This time, I decided to scrap my previous theoretical framework entirely. A clean slate. I stared at the half-finished report on my desk. With a heavy heart, I fed it into the paper shredder, watching as months of work turned into confetti. William, by now, might already be sharing his insights with everyone. To avoid any overlap, any appearance of similarity, a radical shift was necessary. Research, of course, could be approached from multiple angles. I retrieved my initial drafts, opting for a completely different approach. This path wasn't as streamlined as the previous one, but it offered a viable route to results, albeit a more laborious one. Days bled into nights. Survival, not recognition, was my driving force. Every weary hour, every sacrifice, was worth it if it meant escaping the Grim Reaper's grasp. Exhaustion became my constant companion, but I pushed on, driven by a desperate hope. Avoiding death, reclaiming my life, that was the only prize that mattered. The next day, I dragged myself back to the institute, each step heavy with weariness. Ethan, Sophia was just trying to help clear out your study's trash, but she found the door locked. She's in tears now, saying you don't trust her. Sarah called, her voice laced with practiced concern. Reluctantly, I stepped out of the lab to answer. Trust? Of course not. They were prime suspects. Locking my study was a basic precaution. The study has always been locked. Unless, did I forget to lock it before? Have you two been in there recently? The question hung in the air. Sarah's response was immediate, flustered, a jumble of words before she abruptly changed the subject. Suspicious. They had never shown any particular interest in my study before, even actively avoiding it, afraid of being blamed for any misplaced items. Now, suddenly, they were overly concerned with its contents. As I turned back towards the lab, I bumped into William and a group of colleagues returning from lunch. The previous approach wasn't reliable. I'm starting over, focusing on the virus's RNA, William announced loudly, his voice carrying across the corridor. I froze, stunned. How? My new research direction, finalized just last night, already stolen by William? I had locked the study door this morning. How was it possible? A prodigy. Your previous direction already gave me so much inspiration. This new approach? I hadn't even considered it, William continued, basking in the admiring gazes of his colleagues. Such courage to change direction so decisively. Even with my years of experience, I couldn't do that. William preened under the praise, surrounded by colleagues showering him with compliments. He radiated self-congratulatory brilliance. Oh, look, it's Ethan. A colleague, noticing me, called out, halting my retreat. William turned, a smug smirk playing on his lips, clearly relishing my discomfort. I nodded curtly, unable to speak. My mind a whirlwind of confusion and dread. I just wanted to escape. Why are you rushing off? The colleague called after me, his voice dripping with mockery. Did you hear Williams made a breakthrough and realize you're falling behind? Too ashamed to stay? I ignored him, desperate to disappear. But William, in a surprising display of mock magnanimity, intervened. Don't say that. The director values Ethan highly. How could I compare to him? He's probably just modest. At the press conference, I'm sure Dr. Ethan will astound us all. His colleagues erupted in another chorus of praise, now lauding his humility. I knew his words were poisoned with insincerity. He knew everything. He was just waiting for the press conference to publicly humiliate and destroy me. Frantic, I replayed every detail, every interaction, searching for a clue, a weakness, any explanation for William's uncanny access to my research. I questioned my colleagues, casually inquiring about William. Their impressions were uniformly positive. Talented in turn, they said, brilliant, and so generous, always bringing gifts. Despair settled in. Even if I confronted William, these colleagues, swayed by his charm and perhaps his gifts, would undoubtedly side with him. I haven't seen much progress from you lately. The director summoned me to her office, her tone concerned. A wave of apathy washed over me. What was the point? My work would inevitably be stolen. Maybe it was better to just give up. At least I'd live. Is it William? Don't let him get to you. The director gestured for me to come closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. His parents are Yunsur academicians. I've noticed he rarely does actual lab work. Lots of theoretical talk, but whether it's all genuine, that's still an open question. She paused, her gaze sharp. Don't repeat this to anyone. Then, she dismissed me, leaving me to grapple with this new piece of the puzzle. Academicians as parents. That explains so much. Why no thorough investigation in my past life? The influence of powerful parents could easily smooth over uncomfortable truths. The possibilities multiplied. Were there eyes and ears in the lab, informants eager to please William and his family? Or were my research reports, submitted in good faith, being intercepted and passed on? Maybe just giving up was the answer. Survival first. After work, Sarah and Sophia were waiting, as always. I exchanged perfunctory greetings, the forced pleasantries feeling increasingly suffocating. Then, a lifeline. My grandmother called. Escape from the suffocating charade. Grandma, how are you doing? Her voice, warm and familiar, filled my ears. She was fine, she said, just navigating the complexities of medical checkups with all the new restrictions. A cold resolve settled in my heart. A decision made. I really hope this virus is eradicated soon. Grandma misses you so much. You're my only grandson, the one I worry about most. Back home, I called the director. I was leaving the institute, I told her. Independent research. Alone. No more leaks. No more stolen work. I requested a leave of absence, but asked her to announce my resignation publicly. A ruse to lull William into complacency. The next day, packing my belongings, I left the institute. William's reaction was exactly as I'd anticipated, explosive. In these critical times, you're just running away like a coward, he roared. Or is it because you're a fraud, an academic lightweight, finally exposed and trying to escape? His face contorted with fury. He lashed out again, a kick landing on my leg, cheered on by some of his sycophantic colleagues. The institute. Grapevine had already linked William to powerful academic parents. He was the real academic fraud, projecting his own insecurities onto me. But his overreaction reassured me. My departure had thrown a wrench in his plans. No more easy access to my work. I booked a week's stay in a remote cottage, keeping my location secret, even from Sarah and Sophia. I told them I'd been fired, heading to another city to look for research opportunities. They offered no objections, only hollow words of concern, packing my clothes with practiced efficiency. A seed of doubt sprouted within me. Had I misjudged them? Could they be innocent after all? Regardless, caution remained paramount. I decided to pursue both research directions simultaneously. If William presented one at the press conference, I'd have the other in my arsenal. The workload doubled. Time was a relentless enemy. Exhaustion became my baseline. I worked around the clock, fueled by instant noodles and sheer desperation. My mind felt perpetually foggy, but I pressed on. Success, I knew, meant more than just personal vindication. It meant restoring normalcy, freeing countless others from the grip of this devastating virus. Isolated research had its limits. 2 days before the press conference, the director called. An expert analysis meeting. She put my name forward. I had to attend. Reluctant to refuse her continued support, I agreed. Security at the conference was tighter than I'd imagined. 3 security checkpoints, even my coat confiscated. The speakers on stage. Experts in their fields, presented their findings. Even in the opening sessions, I gleaned invaluable insights. Real-world data, expert perspectives. It was a stark contrast to my isolated lab work. In my past life, I dismissed such meetings as time-wasting. Colleagues could summarize the key takeaways. Arrogance, I now realized. Second-hand information was no substitute for direct engagement. The virus, while not highly contagious, is remarkably potent. Some recovered patients, neglecting precautions, have been reinfected. We suspect. An elderly professor's voice trailed off, interrupted by a booming voice. 2 strains of the virus. Professor, it seems we've had a meeting of minds. William strode confidently to the stage, snatching the microphone. Egotism, boundless and blatant. The director hadn't invited him, surely? His academic pedigree, it seemed, opened doors regardless. I've developed 2 research directions, addressing these 2 distinct viral strains. Let me share my overarching strategy with you. William launched into his presentation, smoothly articulating conclusions and strategies that mirrored my own recent work. A cold sweat broke out on my skin. How? What method was he using to pilfer my research so completely, so consistently? But then, a chilling realization dawned. William, in his eagerness to impress, had just exposed his own fraud. I had deliberately pursued 2 research angles as a contingency, a safeguard against theft. But both angles were focused on the same viral strain. William, the charlatan, had just revealed his fundamental misunderstanding. He thought there were 2 different viruses. This expert meeting, meant to be another opportunity for William to steal my work, had inadvertently become his undoing. The tide was about to turn. You're right, it seems my precautions weren't foolproof after all. However, it was almost comical how utterly clueless William was. He'd latched onto the professor's mention of 2 types of viruses and jumped to a completely unfounded conclusion, claiming my 2 research directions were aimed at different viral strains. It was clear he didn't grasp even the most basic virology principles. It was truly eye-opening. William's pronouncements were met with nods of agreement and murmurs of admiration from the audience. I considered letting him dig himself deeper, waiting for the moment when his ignorance became undeniably obvious to everyone, then publicly exposing him for the fraud he was. The sweet taste of revenge was almost within reach. But barely seconds later, just as I was steeling myself to act, several plainclothes individuals approached me. They leaned in, their voices hushed, informing me that a security check had flagged my outerwear. They needed me to accompany them. Though completely bewildered, I followed them out of the lecture hall. They were security personnel, and they led me to a small, nondescript room. Dr. Ethan, we detected a micro-recorder on your coat. We suspect you of espionage, of attempting to steal classified information. Inside the room, the hushed tones vanished. Their words were now direct, accusatory, and delivered with chilling formality. Their accusation hit me like a physical blow, my heart leaping into my throat. My eyes widened in disbelief. No, I had no idea there was a recorder on me. I'm not a spy. I've never even been abroad. My social circle is tiny. My voice trembled, a desperate plea of innocence. I couldn't comprehend this sudden, bizarre turn of events. This room is shielded. Anything said here won't be transmitted. Cooperate fully, be honest, and we might be able to secure a lenient sentence. For you. They remained unconvinced, their faces impassive, as they began documenting something. My statement, perhaps, or my reactions. Panic clawed at me. In a way, their suspicion was understandable. These were sensitive times, and security was paramount. They instructed me to remove my clothes. Resigned, with a heavy heart, I complied. To my utter horror, the detectors beeped not just for my coat, but for every garment except my underwear. Tiny microphones and miniature cameras were embedded in every piece of clothing. I was speechless, utterly devastated. My clothes. Sophia and Sarah had packed my suitcase, meticulously folding and organizing everything. They had done this. Sophia, Sarah, my wife, my sister. The suspicion I had harbored, the nagging doubts, had solidified into a devastating truth. It was them. They had orchestrated this elaborate betrayal. But there was no triumph in this confirmation, only a crushing weight of sorrow and anger. The next 2 hours were an agonizing blur. The security personnel methodically went through my records, verifying my identity, scrutinizing my background. I sat there, a knot of anxiety twisting in my stomach, answering their questions truthfully, every word measured, terrified of inadvertently incriminating myself. They traced the signals emanating from the hidden devices. The destination wasn't a foreign power, but William's location. My background check revealed no suspicious activities, no foreign contacts. The director, contacted by the security team, vehemently vouched for my integrity, for my dedication, for my groundbreaking research. Finally, they began to listen. To truly listen. They started piecing together the puzzle, analyzing my account of events, my suspicions about William, about my family. They concluded, with growing certainty, that this was indeed a case of academic plagiarism masterminded by William. He had, somehow, manipulated my closest family members, turning them into unwitting accomplices. They offered to initiate an investigation, to bring William in for questioning immediately. But I hesitated. If William had stolen my research, his presentation at the press conference would inevitably mirror my own findings. Wouldn't it be more impactful, more devastating for him, to let him bask in his stolen glory, only to have the rug pulled out from under him at the very peak of his triumph? To expose him publicly when he thought he had one? Revenge, I realized, could be a dish best served cold and publicly humiliating. After further consultations and approvals from higher authorities, they released me. As I left, I requested and received a portable signal jammer. When I finally returned to the lecture hall, the conference was over. Only a few staff members were tidying up. Before I could even retrieve my forgotten belongings, a sharp, insistent cramp seized my abdomen. The intense stress of the interrogation, the hours of uncertainty, had finally caught up with me. The urge to rush to the restroom was overwhelming. Stress-induced diarrhea. I had heard of it, but never experienced it firsthand. Now, I understood. I bolted for the nearest restroom, relieved to find it empty. Just as I was about to leave a stall, I heard a familiar voice. William. Of course, it was William. It seemed fate was determined to throw us together. Cautiously, I cracked open the stall door, peering through the narrow gap. He was pacing, phone pressed to his ear, clearly engaged in a call with his father. Dad, relax. Everything's set. I've already spoken to those big-shot academics, just like you said. Of course, I thought bitterly. Connections. Privilege. It was all coming into focus. Judging by Ethan's pace, he should be wrapping up his research today. I'll cram it all in. Memorize everything. It was him. Undeniably, unequivocally him. I fumbled for my phone, activating the voice recorder, capturing every incriminating word. Memorize it? My years of painstaking research reduced to a cheat sheet for this arrogant imposter. But the tables had turned. The game had changed. I leaned against the stall door, patiently waiting for him to finish his call, a grim satisfaction growing within me. William, however, seemed incapable of brevity. His monologue stretched on, fueled by self-importance and unchecked ego. Ugh, it's a shame Ethan quit. I would have loved to see his face when he hit rock bottom, publicly disgraced. Serves him right for not showing me the proper respect. He should understand. Some of us are just born different. Arrogance dripped from every syllable. My fists clenched. I wanted to burst out of the stall, wipe the smug grin off his face. How dare he take credit for my work, then gloat about my downfall. And that's Sarah Lynn. She's been incredibly helpful. But you're not actually thinking of bringing her back into the family, are you? If you do, I'll have a fit. I don't want some poor, pathetic sister. His words stopped me cold. Sarah Lynn? My sister? What was he implying? A jolt of recognition, a buried memory surfacing. Sarah's maiden name, Sarah Lynn Zhang. It clicked. Fragments of half-forgotten conversations, of family stories, coalesced into a horrifying truth. I vaguely remembered a childhood conversation, a hushed whisper between my parents. Sarah had been adopted? No, not adopted. Taken in from her maternal grandmother's care, they had said. She had used her grandmother's surname, Lin, before. They had changed it to Chi when she officially joined our family. A convenient explanation, a white lie to shield us from the truth. But if Sarah was related to William, if Sarah Lin Zhang was William's sister, the pieces slammed into place with brutal force. The betrayal, the access, the meticulously orchestrated sabotage, it all pointed to one horrifying conclusion. Sarah, my sister, had been working with William all along. She was his sister, his accomplice. I stood frozen, reeling from the revelation, struggling to process this seismic shift in my understanding of my own life, my own family. William finally ended his call, 40 minutes of self-aggrandizing drivel. He left the restroom, oblivious to the storm he had just unleashed. I emerged from the stall, shaken to my core, but with a new, chilling clarity. William, the narcissistic fool. Sarah, the hidden accomplice, the sister I never knew I shared with my enemy. Shakily, I made my way back to the rented cottage, my mind racing. The first thing I did upon arriving was set up the signal jammer. Then, with trembling hands, I tore through my suitcase, examining every piece of clothing. Microcameras, micro-recorders. They were everywhere, meticulously concealed. My habit of vocalizing my research process, of thinking aloud, had been weaponized against me by the very people I trusted most. My closest confidants had become my betrayers, exploiting my vulnerability for their own twisted gain. Thank heavens, in all my private musings, in my late-night ramblings, I had never breathed a word about my rebirth, about my second chance. That secret, at least, remained safe. God only knew what they would have done, how they would have twisted even that, to further their insidious scheme. Their eagerness to pack my bags, their seemingly solicitous concern for my well-being, it was all a calculated performance, a smokescreen for their treachery. How blind I had been. How utterly, devastatingly foolish. But there was no time for self-pity, no room for lingering grief. The clock was ticking. The expert meeting, the professor's mention of 2 viral types. It had sparked a new idea, a fresh direction, drawing upon the chilling familiarity of my past death. My own symptoms. They could be the key. I threw myself back into work, the signal jammer humming its protective shield around me. Experimentation, analysis, writing, a furious race against time. The lab, the cottage, became my world, my sanctuary. Finally, the breakthrough came. The data coalesced, the conclusions solidified. The second vaccine, just as I'd envisioned. Exhausted but triumphant, I immediately sent the complete research findings to the director. No hesitation, no delay. Then, and only then, did I pack my belongings, dismantling my makeshift lab, switching off the signal jammer, severing the electronic shield that had been my fragile protection. I wouldn't give them another inch, another opportunity. Ethan, dear, how's the new job search going? Settling in at the new institute? Any progress in the lab? Predictable. Less than 12 hours until the press conference, and the vultures were circling. Sophia's voice, saccharine and falsely cheerful, crackled through the phone. It was the first call I'd received from her since leaving home. Days of silence, now this sudden, cloying concern. Concern? Hardly. The vaccine development had stalled. They were desperate for information, for any scrap they could feed to William. My wife. Why was she doing this to me? Why had she chosen betrayal over loyalty, deceit over love? She and Sarah launched into a well-rehearsed script of encouragement, urging me not to lose heart, to persevere in my research. Empty. Platitudes, hollow reassurances. They went on and on, a relentless barrage of false solicitude, before finally ending the call. Since they had such high hopes for my continued research, who was I to disappoint them? I retrieved one of the micro-recorders they had so thoughtfully planted on my clothing. Aiming it at myself, I began to speak, rambling incoherently, filling the recording with meaningless jargon, padded with basic pathology and virology concepts, textbook definitions, rudimentary principles. Just enough to sound vaguely scientific to a layman, utterly nonsensical to anyone with actual expertise. William, bless his heart, would need all the help he could get. Consider it a free, albeit useless, study guide. 2 hours until the press conference. Ethan, I checked with your supervisor. She confirmed you're authorized to attend today's press conference. No time to waste, let's go. Just like before. As I stepped out of the cottage, Sarah and Sophia were there, blocking my path. They had known, somehow, that I'd be heading to the press conference. From some point, their demeanor had subtly shifted. A coldness had crept into their interactions with me. Indifference, neglect. In my past life, blinded by misplaced trust, I hadn't seen it. Now, the family filter shattered. Their insincere concern was glaringly obvious. Wordlessly, I got into the car. The cottage was far from the city center. A free ride to the press conference? Why not take it? I knew they were going to get me there, one way or another, to ensure their precious William could bask in the stolen limelight. They urged me to rest in the car, even confiscating my phone, instructing me to close my eyes and nap. I played along, feigning compliance. The atmosphere in the car was almost festive. Sarah and Sophia hummed cheerful tunes, barely containing their glee. Just like before. And, just like before, halfway to our destination, the car sputtered, coughed, and died. Engine trouble, Sarah announced with theatrical dismay. They launched into a performance of feigned panic, assuring me not to worry, we'd still make it. Then, they both exited the vehicle, supposedly to find a mechanic, locking me inside the car before disappearing from sight. An hour crawled by. Then, finally, they reappeared, a bewildered-looking mechanic in tow. Ethan, this place is so remote. It took forever to find someone to help, but don't worry, we'll get you there. You'll make it, Sarah said, her voice dripping with false reassurance. They were laying it on thick, acting as if my well-being was their utmost priority. With the car repaired, we sped towards the conference venue, now agonizingly close. Sarah's phone began to ring incessantly. She glanced at the screen, flicker of alarm crossing her face, then quickly silenced the call. William, undoubtedly. He must have finished his presentation by now, judging by the timing. The phone rang again, persistent, insistent, even after being silenced twice. Sarah, unable to resist her true loyalties, let it ring. William calling, is it? Your dear brother? Don't want to leave him hanging, do you? I finally broke the silence, abandoning the charade. No more pretense. Ethan, what are you talking about? Sarah's face stiffened, her denial brittle. You're delusional, Ethan. Sarah and I are doing all this for you. Sophia chimed in, her voice shrill, echoing Sarah's feigned indignation. I had no patience for their theatrics. I activated the car's voice command system, instructing it to answer the incoming call. Sarah Lynn, what in God's name did you give me? Everyone's laughing at me. William's enraged voice exploded through the car speakers. Silence descended in the car, thick and suffocating. Sarah and Sophia were speechless, their carefully constructed facade crumbling into dust. Just then, the car pulled up outside the conference center. I opened the door and stepped out, leaving them behind. They slowly followed, shadows of their former selves. How long have you known? Sarah finally whispered, the fight gone from her voice. She had admitted it, the betrayal, the deception. But before I could answer, William, like a whirlwind of fury, launched himself at her. I'll kill you, he shrieked, his face contorted with rage. How dare you sabotage me? My parents will destroy you. His eyes were bloodshot, his grip on Sarah's arm like a vice. He looked like he wanted to tear her apart with his bare hands. But before he could inflict any real damage, uniformed police officers, who had clearly been waiting, swiftly intervened, wrestling him to the ground, handcuffing him, and leading him away. His public humiliation was complete. His performance, his stolen glory, had imploded in spectacular fashion. William, what's happening? Why are the police here? Did the presentation go badly? Sarah, despite William's violent outburst, rushed after him, her face pale, her voice laced with concern. Even after everything, some twisted sense of loyalty, of familial obligation, still lingered. I watched her, a cold detachment settling over me. I had spoken to my grandmother. Sarah's biological parents had been unkind, neglectful. My parents, seeing a frail, neglected child on the streets, had taken her in, offering her love, a home, a family. They had moved, changed their lives, to protect her, to give her a fresh start, never revealing her past to anyone else. And this was how she repaid their kindness, their love. Betrayal, deceit. For him, for William, her biological brother, a man who treated her with contempt, who saw her as nothing more than a tool to be used and discarded. My parents, if they were watching from above, must be heartbroken. The schedule dictated that the final presentation was to be given by our institute's last speaker, me, drawing inspiration from the professor's two-strain theory and the chilling memory of my own past death. I had a flash of insight. Using my own symptoms, my own death throes, as a morbid template, I had successfully developed a vaccine for the second viral strain. As I finished presenting my research, my findings, a wave of applause erupted, washing over me. Tears welled in my eyes. I had done it. I had rewritten my death sentence. I had reclaimed what was rightfully mine. Ethan, what you sent me yesterday was already groundbreaking. But this is incredible. I knew I hadn't misjudged you. The director approached, her face beaming, her hand clapping me on the shoulder in congratulations. William had been apprehended. The director had realized, during his presentation, that his research was a verbatim copy of my initial submission to her. She had been ready to have him removed from the stage for questioning. Then, William, in a desperate attempt to salvage the situation, had begun reciting pathology and virology basics, textbook definitions, fundamental concepts. It had been a farcical display of utter incompetence, a public self-immolation. The audience, initially confused, had quickly descended into bewildered laughter. I hadn't witnessed it firsthand, but the director's description, the sheer absurdity of it, was deeply satisfying. No wonder William had been apoplectic. For someone so obsessed with appearances, so desperate for validation, such a public, humiliating exposure would be a devastating blow, a fate worse than professional death. Sophia, I said, turning to my wife, who stood at the edge of the crowd, pale and lost, watching as bouquets of flowers were thrust into my arms. We've been together for so long. I need to understand. Why? Why blame me? She retorted, her voice laced with bitterness. If you had done your own laundry, folded your own clothes, we wouldn't have had the chance. Her eyes welled with tears, but there was no remorse in them, only resentment. I regret it. I regret marrying you so young, spending my life as your drudge, your housekeeper. You achieved success, while I wasted my prime years on domestic chores. I should have married someone like William, someone with money, with power. Her carefully constructed composure shattered, and she dissolved into loud, unrestrained sobs. I didn't know what to say. I simply reached out and embraced her. We were both flawed, both culpable. I had been consumed by my work, neglecting her, taking her for granted. My emotional absence had created a void, a breeding ground for resentment and bitterness. Later, the clinical trials confirmed the efficacy of both vaccines. Mass production began. Life, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence, began to return to normal. I chose to pursue legal action against William, refusing any suggestion of leniency. He would face the full consequences of his actions. In court, he vehemently denied any personal responsibility, blaming Sarah entirely, claiming she had coerced him, manipulated him, forced him into plagiarism. He hurled vile insults at her, denouncing her as trash, declaring she would never be accepted into the Zhang family. He even resorted to threats, attempting to intimidate her into taking the fall, into confessing to everything. Sarah, pushed to her breaking point, snapped. In a moment of uncontrolled rage, she stabbed William, not once, but multiple times. Amateurishly, thankfully, not fatally, but enough to land them both in jail. William for plagiarism and fraud, Sarah for assault. A fittingly messy, tragic end to their twisted collaboration. The scandal erupted, engulfing William and his family. Public outrage was immense. The media dissected every detail of the case, exposing William's privileged background, his arrogance, his blatant disregard for ethical conduct. The public fury was directed not just at William, but at his parents, the esteemed academicians who had enabled his behavior, who had used their influence to protect him. To quell the public outcry, to salvage their own reputations, William's parents publicly disowned him, severing all ties with their disgraced son. William, stripped of his privilege, abandoned by his family, was left utterly alone. His words had come true. The Zhang family doors were closed to Sarah, and now permanently slammed shut for him as well. 3 years later, William was released from prison. He emerged into a world that hadn't forgotten his crimes. He was ostracized, reviled, a pariah in his own city. Even his parents refused to let him back into their home. He drifted, homeless, a ghost haunting the streets he once believed he owned. His name, synonymous with academic fraud, was a curse. No one would hire him. His past actions had poisoned his future. Desperate, with no other options, he descended into the fringes of society, reportedly ending up in the adult film industry, a final, degrading act of desperation. A fitting, if bleak, karmic retribution. For myself, I formally resigned from the Vaccine Research Institute. The ordeal had been a brutal awakening. I had neglected Sophia, taken her love for granted, prioritized my career above all else. It was time for a change, a fundamental shift in our dynamic. I embraced domesticity, learning to cook, to clean, to manage the household, supporting Sophia as she pursued her own career ambitions. The atmosphere at home softened, the tension eased. When Sarah was released from prison, she returned home. Our home. She had been misguided, manipulated, blinded by a distorted sense of family loyalty. She had paid the price for her mistakes, but she had also shown remorse, a genuine desire for redemption. If fate had granted me a second chance, who was I to deny her one? Life, slowly, painstakingly, settled back into a semblance of normalcy. We had weathered a storm, faced betrayal and loss, but we had also found a path to forgiveness, to healing. Sophia, Sarah, and we had come through the fire, scarred but not broken. We had faced the darkness, and now we would walk forward, together, into the light. After all, a united home, a loving family, that was the foundation upon which everything else was built.